You did what? I whispered. My own daughter wouldn't look at me. Her eyes, cold, like the ocean in winter. Mom, we're moving tomorrow. I sold your beach house. The world stopped. My chest tightened as if every memory of my late husband was being ripped from the walls. This house was his voice in the morning, our laughter on the porch, the last place that still smelled like love. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out, just a silence so loud it hurt. My daughter's heels clicked down the hall, while a stranger hammered a for sale sign into the sand. 30 years of dreams sold in a day. People say a home is just wood and stone. But tell me, how do you bury a lifetime under a price tag? When my daughter drove away that afternoon, the world around me fell quiet. But not the kind of quiet that soothes. It was the kind that hums inside your chest, like the echo after a gunshot. I stood on the porch, still holding the cup of tea I'd made that morning. The steam was gone, the liquid cold. The ocean stretched before me, steady, heartless, pretending nothing had changed. For 30 years, that little house by the sea had been my world. I built it with my husband, David. We painted the shutters blue because he said blue meant hope. After he passed away, I kept everything the same, as if the color itself could keep him near. Now even that blue looked different. It felt borrowed, like everything else in my life. I walked through each room, touching the walls, the furniture, the marks Melissa had made on the doorframe as she grew taller. There was still the faint smell of lemon polish mixed with sea salt. The sound of the waves came through the open window, just like always. And yet, nothing felt like mine anymore. She had sold it. My daughter had sold our home. People say you can't lose what you gave away. But that's not true. Sometimes you lose it because someone takes it before you're ready to let go. I remember the day we first moved in. Melissa was 7, running barefoot through the living room, laughing because her voice bounced off the empty walls. "This is our forever house," she said. I nodded, smiling. Back then, I believed forever was something we could own. I packed my memories into cardboard boxes. Each item hurt to touch. David's old fishing hat, still smelling of sun and salt. The photo of Melissa holding her newborn daughter, my sweet Ella. The recipe book with coffee stains from every Sunday breakfast. By the time I sealed the last box, I was shaking. Grief has a weight. You can feel it in your arms, your spine, your bones. That night, I stayed at my sister's house. Her home was smaller, but warmer, filled with noise. Children, TV, the smell of cornbread. She gave me her guest room and a smile that tried to be comforting. "Stay as long as you need," she said. I thanked her, but inside, I wanted to scream, because nothing I needed could fit inside a room. Lying awake, I stared at the ceiling fan, spinning in slow circles. I kept thinking about Melissa's face, the coldness in her voice when she said, "Mom, I sold the beach house." No tears, no apology, just final. I wondered where I went wrong. Maybe I spoiled her. Maybe I taught her that love meant never saying no. I worked double shifts as a nurse so she could go to college, so she could have the life I never had. And now, she had taken the one thing I thought we both cherished. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee. I washed the same mug 3 times because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Every sound in the house felt too loud. The creak of the floor, the ticking of the clock, my own breath. When I looked out the window, the neighbor waved at me. I waved back, pretending I hadn't seen the pity in her eyes. Everyone in town already knew. That's how small towns work. You lose something on Monday, and by Tuesday, it's community news. I went to the grocery store just to be around people, even strangers. It's funny how loneliness drives you to seek noise. At the checkout line, the cashier smiled politely. "You doing okay today, Mrs. Williams?" I said I was fine. We both knew I was lying. On the way back, I pulled over near the pier. The ocean breeze hit my face, sharp with salt. I thought of David again. He used to say, "You can't control the tide, baby. You just learn how to stand before it." I smiled sadly. I was trying to stand, but the tide was stronger than I'd ever known. When I got home, I sat in the kitchen and stared at my phone. I typed Melissa's name 3 times before finally calling, straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recorded voice said, "Hey, it's Mel. Leave a message." My throat burned. All I could manage to say was, "I hope you're happy." Then I hung up and cried until my chest ached. There's a kind of crying that doesn't make sound. It's the kind that folds you inward, like you're trying to disappear into yourself. Later that night, my sister came in quietly, put a hand on my shoulder, and didn't say a word. That was mercy, the kind that doesn't try to fix you, just lets you fall apart safely. In the days that followed, I stopped calling, stopped hoping for an explanation. Some things hurt more when you keep poking them. But every time I saw the ocean from a distance, it pulled at me. Not because I missed the house, but because it reminded me that even waves that destroy also return, again and again. Maybe that's what forgiveness looks like. Something that leaves, but always finds its way back. I wasn't there yet, but maybe one day. Until then, I just kept breathing. Some breaths hurt, some didn't, but I kept taking them anyway. It's strange how life goes on, even when yours feels like it stopped. The mail still comes, the sun still rises, people still ask if you're doing okay, using that same soft tone they save for funerals. Weeks passed since Melissa sold the house, but the ache hadn't dulled. It had simply changed shape, from sharp grief to something heavier, quieter, harder to carry. Every morning, I walked to the pier just to watch the sea. The water looked the same, but it no longer sounded the same. Before, the waves had rhythm. They used to sing with me when I hung the laundry or cooked breakfast. Now they sounded like whispers about everything I'd lost. I told myself I wouldn't drive past Seabreeze Lane again. I didn't need to see the strangers who now lived there, or the fancy car in the driveway where David used to park his old truck. But pain has its own compass. One afternoon, I found myself turning down that road anyway. The air was thick with salt and jasmine. The porch railings gleamed white. Freshly painted, my porch, a welcome home sign, hung from the door. I stared at it for a long time, the irony cutting deep. Through the window, I saw people moving around. Not the family that bought it, but workers setting up tables, lights, decorations. The sound of clinking glass drifted out. It wasn't just any gathering. It was a celebration. I parked across the street, hidden behind the oak tree where David once hung wind chimes. The chimes were gone now, too. For a while, I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding so loud I could hear it over the music. Then, before I knew it, I stepped out of the car. I don't even remember deciding to move. I just needed to be closer, to see for myself what had become of the place that held every piece of me. People were arriving. Elegant dresses, linen shirts, expensive smiles. The kind of people who call sadness drama and greed ambition. Then I saw her, Melissa, standing on the porch, holding a glass of wine, laughing with a group of strangers. Her hair was styled, her makeup flawless, Her smile, bright. It was the smile of someone who had forgotten she ever had a mother who cried herself to sleep. I froze. My own daughter. The little girl who used to chase fireflies in this yard. Now looking like she belonged in a magazine cover about new beginnings. A waiter passed by with a tray. Someone clinked a glass. The crowd quieted. Melissa raised her drink. "To fresh starts," she said, her voice floating through the air like perfume. Sweet, artificial, fading too fast. Everyone cheered. And me? I stood there in the shadows, my throat tight, my eyes burning. Fresh starts. For her, maybe. For me, it was a burial. I wanted to scream, to tell them this wasn't hers to celebrate. That every board in that porch had my fingerprints. That every nail, every paint stroke, every tear from the night David died still lived in those walls. But I said nothing, because anger without power is just noise, and I'd already lost too much to make more of it. A neighbor spotted me and came over. "Elaine," she whispered, awkward. "I didn't expect to see you here. Melissa told me you were settling in just fine with your sister." I smiled, the polite smile we women learn to wear when our hearts are breaking. "Just wanted to see how it looks now," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. The neighbor nodded, relief in her eyes. Relief that I wouldn't cry right there, that she wouldn't have to witness the mess of me. "They did a beautiful job," she said softly. "You should be proud." Proud. The word tasted bitter. Pride used to mean watching Melissa graduate, watching her become a mother herself. Now it meant pretending I wasn't shattered while strangers toasted inside my home. When I turned to leave, I caught one last glimpse through the window. Melissa was dancing. Not the wild, joyful kind of dance she used to do as a child. This one was careful, graceful, rehearsed. Her husband spun her around, and the crowd clapped. She looked happy. I wanted to hate her for that. As I drove away, the laughter behind me grew faint, then disappeared, but it stayed echoing in my mind, looping with every breath I took. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling above my sister's guest bed looked endless, stretching into memories I couldn't escape. I tried to pray, but even my prayers felt heavy. I tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Grief had changed again. Now it was anger, with nowhere to go. I thought about calling Melissa, about asking why, but the question had already died inside me. She had her new beginning. I was still stuck in her ending. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Melissa, smiling under those string lights, clinking glasses with people who didn't even know what that house once meant. Morning came, but it didn't bring peace. I got up before the sun, made coffee I couldn't drink, and stared at the phone on the counter. I thought about calling her again, thought about asking how she could celebrate while her mother still ached like a fresh wound. But what would be the point? You can't reason with someone who's decided their comfort is worth your heartbreak. By afternoon, the whispers had begun. At the grocery store, 2 women from church turned when I walked past. They smiled, too politely, then leaned toward each other. I didn't have to hear the words to know they were talking about me. Small towns are merciless that way. They don't ask questions. They trade stories. When I reached the cashier, she looked at me with those eyes, the kind people use when they pity you but don't want to get involved. "Everything okay, Mrs. Williams?" I nodded. "Just fine, baby." But my voice cracked on the last word. That night, I sat on the porch of my sister's house, watching the streetlights blur through the humidity. I kept thinking, how did I raise a daughter who could forget where she came from? And worse, How did I let her believe she could? The next day, a white envelope came in the mail. No return address. Inside was a glossy invitation, charity gala, hosted by Melissa and Tom Williams. The photo printed on the card was of the house, my house, glowing with candles and soft light. A note at the bottom read, "Proceeds go to the Coastal Women's Clinic. We'd love to have you, Mom." I laughed, a small, bitter sound that didn't feel like mine. Was this her idea of an olive branch? Or another performance? A chance to polish the image she'd built on my broken memories? For 3 days, I left the invitation on the kitchen table, pretending I didn't care. But every time I passed it, my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to tear it apart. Another part wanted to see her eyes when she realized what she'd done could never be undone. On the 4th day, I ironed my dress, the navy one David loved. I told my sister I was going to see something. She didn't ask what. By the time I arrived, the house shimmered under golden lights. Cars lined the street. Music floated through the air. Slow jazz, the kind David used to hum. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, steadying my breath before walking through the gate. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The hallway smelled different. Too clean, too expensive. Where our family photos once hung, there were abstract paintings now. Cold colors, pretty, but empty. Melissa saw me before I said a word. Her smile faltered. "Mom, you came." I nodded. I wanted to see what a new beginning looks like. The people around us went silent. A few shifted awkwardly, pretending to check their phones. Tom walked over, his voice careful. "Mrs. Williams, we're honored you're here tonight." "Are you?" I asked. "Because I'm not sure honor has much to do with any of this." Melissa's hand trembled as she reached for mine. "Please, not here. Let's just talk later." I pulled back. "No, baby. Later's what got us here." The room went heavy, the kind of quiet that makes everyone hold their breath. I could feel heat rising up my neck, grief turning into fire. My daughter looked at me like I was the problem, like I'd come to ruin her perfect night. Someone in the crowd whispered, "That's her mother, isn't it? The one who lost the house." The words cut through me. Lost. As if I'd misplaced it. As if it hadn't been stolen. I turned and left before anyone could see the tears spill. Outside, the night air hit my face like cold glass. I walked toward the beach, the sand crunching under my heels. The moon was bright, the tide high. I took off my shoes and stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves touch my feet. I whispered, "David, if you can hear me, tell me what to do, because I don't recognize myself anymore." A gust of wind blew across the shore, lifting the hem of my dress. The ocean didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Sometimes, silence says the most. I stayed there until the tide began to rise, washing away my footprints faster than I could make them. And I realized, maybe that's what grief is. You keep walking in circles, hoping it leaves a mark, but the world keeps erasing you, wave by wave. So I turned back toward the lights in the distance, toward the house that no longer belonged to me, and made myself a promise. This would be the last night I looked back. Have you ever reached a point where forgiveness felt like the wrong kind of survival? That question stayed with me the whole drive home, echoing like a song I didn't want to remember. That night by the beach, I promised myself I wouldn't look back again. But life has a way of showing you that promises are just whispers against the wind. A few days later, I was making tea when my phone buzzed. A message from Brenda, my old neighbor. Turn on the news. The kind of message that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. I turned on the TV, and there it was. A news headline that made my hands go cold. Local contractor under investigation for fraud. Community in shock. And standing behind the man, reporters swarmed. I saw her. Melissa. Her hair pulled tight. Sunglasses too big for her face. The same reporters that once praised her for charity work were now chasing her down the courthouse steps. Tom, her husband, kept his head low. The microphone caught his voice just enough to hear him say, "No comment." A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Williams, did you know about your husband's illegal transfers?" Melissa said nothing. She just gripped his arm tighter. I didn't smile. Not exactly. But I felt something uncoil inside me. A release. A weight I'd carried for months, shifting off my chest. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't joy. It was recognition. The kind that says, "See, the tide never forgets where it came from." I poured my tea, sat down, and just watched. No tears this time. No shaking hands. Only quiet justice playing out on a flat screen. The next morning, Savannah was buzzing. You could feel it in every grocery aisle, every coffee shop corner. At the farmer's market, Brenda spotted me near the peach stand. She lowered her voice, though everyone around us could probably hear anyway. "Elaine, honey, you seen the paper. They say the bank froze their assets. And that fancy car, gone. Repossessed yesterday." I nodded, steady. "I saw." She gave me a look. That half-guilty, half-excited look people get when karma finally comes around. "I'm not saying they deserved it, but," she whispered. "I know," I said. "You don't have to." She chuckled softly. "Girl, you always did know how to let silence do the talking." I smiled. Silence has better aim than anger ever will. Later that day, I scrolled through social media, though I told myself not to. The same people who once posted, "Your power couple," under Melissa's photos were now typing things like, "See, money built on lies never lasts. Didn't she say it was just a house?" That one hit me, just a house. I remembered that line, like it was burned into my chest. "Mom, it's just a house," she'd said, cold as stone. And now, standing outside a bank she no longer owned, with her own house being seized. Life had repeated her words, right back to her. Justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it just whispers your own sentence in reverse. A few evenings later, while flipping through channels, I saw another clip. A reporter outside the courthouse asked, "Mrs. Williams, do you regret selling your mother's home?" Melissa froze. Cameras flashed like lightning around her, and for a split second, I saw it. Not pride, not denial, but realization. That tiny, heavy flicker when a heart finally understands the weight of what it's done. I turned off the TV, not because I couldn't watch, but because I didn't need to. That night, I took a walk by the water. The sky was pink and gray. The kind of quiet sunset that only coastal towns know. I thought about David, about how he used to say, "You don't have to chase justice, baby. Just stay still long enough. It'll find you." And he was right. It had found me, not in courtrooms or apologies, but in the simple fact that truth had surfaced without my hands ever getting dirty. I stood there, letting the wind play with my hair, the waves lap against my feet. For the first time in months, the sea didn't sound cruel. It sounded like breathing. When I got home, my sister was on the porch with a newspaper, folded in half. "Guess who's on the front page again?" she said. I waved her off. "Don't need to read it. I already know how it ends." She studied me for a moment. "You look different, lighter." "I am," I said, and it was true, because nothing heals a heart quite like watching life handle what you couldn't. The next few weeks felt like watching a tide pull back after a storm. Everything Melissa once built on pride was slowly washing away, one headline at a time. The bank took the house. The company shut down. Her friends, the ones who toasted to new beginnings, stopped calling. I didn't go looking for updates. But news has a way of finding you in a small town. One morning at the cafe, two women were whispering at the next table. "Did you hear?" one said. "Her husband took off. They froze her accounts." The other shook her head. "Poor thing. She thought she was untouchable." I stirred my coffee slowly. The spoon clinked against the cup, steady, calm. It's strange how peace sounds exactly like that. Soft, rhythmic, unbothered. A week later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Melissa stood there. She looked nothing like the woman from the charity galas. No makeup, no jewelry, no camera-ready smile. Just my daughter, tired, thin, human again. "Mom," she said. Her voice cracked on the first syllable. "I didn't say anything. I just waited. I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling. "They took everything." For a second, something old in me wanted to reach out. The nurse in me, the mother in me, but another part of me, the part that had learned pain could be sacred, told me to stay still. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten Sunday breakfast on for years. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was necessary. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry." Just 2 words, barely louder than a breath, but heavy enough to fill the whole room. I kept my voice calm. "What are you sorry for, Melissa?" Her eyes filled again. "For thinking I was smarter than life." That was the moment I exhaled. Really exhaled. Not from relief, but from release. I reached across the table, covered her shaking hands with mine. "They say the ocean doesn't take, it teaches," I said softly. "You just learned your lesson the hard way." She nodded, tears spilling quietly. That night, after she went to sleep in the guest room, I sat outside on the porch. The moon was full, laying silver light over everything, even the pain. Somewhere inside, a deep stillness bloomed. I realized I didn't need an apology to heal. I just needed this silence, this proof that time really does finish what anger can't. Justice had already done its work. Grace had followed behind, gentle but certain. I thought of David, of how he used to say, "Let God be the tide. You just keep your feet in the sand." He was right. The tide had done what it was meant to do. And now it was time to stand still and let the calm return. A few days later, Melissa told me she was applying for a job at the women's clinic she once donated to. Not as a director this time, just an assistant. She said she wanted to start over from the ground up. And for the first time, I saw my daughter. Not the woman who betrayed me. Not the image she tried to maintain. Just my girl, humbled, learning, alive. That's when I knew the story had turned full circle. I wasn't broken anymore, and she wasn't lost. We had both been reset by the same storm. You ever witness a moment like that? When life fixes what pain couldn't, and you realize you didn't need revenge at all? Just a little more time for truth to bloom. If that made your heart smile, press like. And if you still believe that kindness can outlast karma, type 1 in the comments. Let's remind each other that gentle justice is still real. The house was quiet again. Melissa had gone out early to meet with someone from the women's clinic. She'd started waking up before me these days, making her own coffee, writing things in a small notebook I didn't ask about. I didn't need to. She was learning her own way now. I stood at the kitchen sink, sunlight spilling across the counter, and realized how different silence feels when it's not filled with anger. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, like a blanket after a long winter. For months, I had lived waiting for the next wound, the next betrayal, the next reason to ache. But that morning, the only sound was the kettle whistling. And for once, it wasn't a reminder of what was missing. It was proof of what had survived. After breakfast, I went for a walk along the beach. The sand was cool under my feet, and the wind carried that familiar mix of salt and pine from the marshes. I'd walked this stretch 1,000 times with David, years ago. Back then, we were just two young fools who believed love could build anything. Now, walking alone, I finally understood what he meant when he used to say, "Some things you only see once you stop trying to fix them." I stopped at the edge of the pier and watched the waves curl and break. The same sea that once felt cruel now felt almost kind, like it was trying to tell me something without words. All this time, I had been fighting what was already gone. I thought healing meant getting back what I lost, but maybe it just meant learning to love what was left. That afternoon, I cleaned out a few old boxes. Inside, one was a stack of letters, ones I'd written to David after he passed, but never mailed. I smiled at how foolish that sounded. Writing letters to a man buried under the sea breeze and time. Still, I sat down and opened one. Dear David, sometimes I wonder if I failed as a mother. You always said I loved too much, that I tried to fix pain instead of letting people feel it. Maybe you were right. But today, for the first time, I saw our daughter break and rebuild herself. And I realized that maybe love isn't about protecting someone from the lesson. It's about standing far enough away to let life be the teacher. I folded the letter carefully and put it back. Then I whispered to the empty room, "She's learning, love, finally." In the evening, Melissa came home, tired but smiling. She told me she got the job, the entry-level position at the clinic. There was pride in her eyes, but also humility, a kind I hadn't seen since she was a little girl bringing home crayon drawings for the fridge. We had dinner quietly. The air between us felt fragile but warm, like glass warmed by sunlight. Halfway through, she looked up and said, "Mom, I still don't understand how you didn't hate me." I put my fork down and met her eyes. "I did," I said simply, "for a while, but hate's like salt water. Drink enough of it, and it just makes you thirstier." She smiled faintly, tears forming. "You always talk in riddles." "Maybe, but the truth's hiding in them," I said. "You'll figure it out." We didn't say much else that night. We didn't need to. Forgiveness doesn't need ceremony. Sometimes it just sits quietly across the table, eating mashed potatoes and remembering how to breathe. Later, after she went to bed, I stepped outside again. The moon hung low, golden, shimmering over the water like a promise half kept. I sat on the porch steps, wrapped my shawl tighter, and closed my eyes. Inside my head, everything slowed. The waves, the wind, even the ache that had once lived in my chest. I thought about what the last few months had taken from me. My home, my peace, my illusions. And I thought about what they had given back. Clarity, strength, and something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Gratitude for pain that taught me where my boundaries were. Gratitude for silence that forced me to listen. Gratitude for loss that showed me what couldn't be lost. My ability to love again. I picked up a small seashell near my foot, smooth and pink from the tide. It was cracked on one side, but still beautiful. I turned it over in my hand and smiled. Maybe we're all a little like that, broken somewhere, shining anyway. The next morning, I woke early and wrote something on a piece of paper before Melissa came downstairs. It wasn't a letter, not a prayer, just a reminder. I taped it to the fridge so she'd see it every day. Pain is a teacher, not a life sentence. Gratitude is how you graduate. When she read it, she looked at me, her eyes soft. Did you write that? I nodded. She smiled. Sounds like something Dad would have said. Maybe he did, I said, sipping my tea. I just finally understood it. That afternoon, I walked by the beach again, notebook in hand this time. I'd started writing small reflections each day. Things I wished I'd told myself earlier in life. By the time I reached the pier, the wind had picked up. The pages fluttered like wings. But I held on. I wrote one last line for the day. When life takes something from you, it's not punishment. It's pruning, making space for new growth. The moment I finished writing, a stranger's shadow stretched across the sand beside me. A quiet voice said, "That's a beautiful thought." I turned around. An older man stood there, tall, silver-haired, calm like the sea itself. He smiled, not curious, not intrusive, just knowing. And that's how I met Orion Sage. The man's shadow stretched beside mine in the sand, long and quiet. When I turned around, I saw someone who looked like he belonged to the ocean, calm, timeless, untouched by hurry. His hair was silver, not white, and his skin carried that soft gold tone of people who've lived most of their lives in sunlight. He smiled. "That's a beautiful thought you wrote." I held my notebook tighter, a little embarrassed. "You were reading over my shoulder?" "Just the last line," he said, pointing gently toward the page, fluttering in the breeze. "About pruning. You're right. Life does that." I studied him for a moment. There was something disarming about the way he spoke. No judgment, no pretense, like he wasn't trying to teach me anything. We stood there, watching the waves. Finally, I said, "I used to think losing things meant I'd done something wrong." He nodded. "And now I think maybe life just takes what you've outgrown, even when you still love it." He smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd heard that lesson 1,000 times, but still found it beautiful, every single one. "That's wisdom," he said softly. "Hard-earned, I imagine." I laughed quietly. "Earned the hard way, yes." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. He glanced at the sea, then at me. "You know, people think the ocean's always moving forward, but it's not. It's really just returning. Again and again. That's what healing looks like too. You don't move on. You return to yourself." His words landed gently, like pebbles skipping across water, leaving rings that expanded long after the sound was gone. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. It wasn't because what he said was new. It was because it was true. We started walking along the shore. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer details. Somehow, he already seemed to know. After a while, he said, "You've carried grief like a second skin, haven't you?" I didn't answer right away. The truth sat heavy in my chest. "Yes," I whispered. "And I wore it so long, I forgot it wasn't part of me." He nodded slowly. "Grief's like salt water. You can float in it, or you can drown. The difference is whether you trust it to hold you." I looked at him, curious. "And what if you're too tired to trust anything anymore?" He smiled. "Then you stop swimming. Let the water carry you for a while. That's faith. Not in God, not in others, but in the rhythm of life itself." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried something that stilled the air around us. For the first time in months, I felt safe. We reached the end of the pier. The boards creaked beneath our feet. He leaned against the railing and watched the horizon. "I'm Orion," he said finally, as if the sea had asked him to introduce himself. "Elaine," I replied. "Williams." He nodded like he already knew. "I've seen you here before. Always alone, always watching." "I come here to think," I said. "To listen." "To what?" he asked. "To the silence between the waves," I said. "Sometimes it answers better than people do." He chuckled. "Then you're already halfway home." "Home," I echoed. He looked at me then, really looked, and his gaze was so steady it almost made me look away. "Home isn't where you live," he said. "It's where you stop running from yourself." The words struck something deep inside me, a place that had been closed too long. I wanted to say something, but no words came. Just the sound of the sea, steady, infinite, forgiving. When I finally spoke, my voice was smaller. "I've spent months blaming myself for what I didn't do, for what I didn't see coming." He nodded. "Most people confuse guilt with love." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He turned toward me, his eyes bright but kind. "Guilt says, I should have saved them. Love says, I'm grateful they're still learning." I looked away, blinking hard. The wind stung my eyes, but maybe it wasn't the wind. He continued, "When you can thank life even for the things that broke you, that's when you stop being a victim. You become part of the tide itself." We stood in silence again, both watching the same endless water. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift. Not a loud awakening, but a quiet rearranging of everything I thought I knew. I realized that all this time, I'd been trying to protect my daughter from pain, when pain was the very thing that had brought her back to me. Maybe love wasn't about shielding someone. Maybe it was about trusting that even when they fall, life will teach them how to stand again. Before leaving, Orion looked out toward the horizon and said, "When the sea takes something from you, it always brings something back. It's never the same, but sometimes it's better." He turned, smiled, and started walking down the beach. I wanted to call after him, to ask where he lived, if he came here often, if he'd talk again, but something told me I didn't need to, because the lesson had already landed, because peace doesn't always stay. It visits, leaves footprints, and expects you to remember the path. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. Gratitude doesn't erase the pain. It transforms it. What once hurt now humbles me. What once broke me now opens me. And somehow, that feels like love, finding its way home. I closed the notebook, placed it beside my bed, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Orion." Not because he saved me, but because he reminded me that maybe I'd never needed saving at all. The next morning, I went back to the beach. I didn't know why. Maybe to see if Orion was real, or just another shape the sea made, to remind me I was finally listening. The tide was low, the air still. There was no sign of him, only the imprint of footsteps, half erased by water. I sat on the sand, notebook in my lap, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence, because silence was no longer empty. It was full of answers I hadn't known how to hear. I opened the notebook to the page where I'd written his words. "You don't move on, you return to yourself." I traced the sentence with my finger. It felt like the truth had been sitting in front of me all along, waiting for me to stop fighting it. That afternoon, I cleaned the porch, the same porch where Melissa once cried as a little girl after scraping her knees. Now, it was where I'd cried over her betrayal. And somehow, both memories felt sacred, two sides of the same lesson. When she came home from work, her hair smelled of disinfectant and ocean air. She looked exhausted but alive, in a way I hadn't seen in years. I asked her how her day went. She smiled. "Busy, but good. We helped a young mother today. She was scared, but she'll be okay." Her voice softened. "I never realized how much women carry, Mom. Not just their own pain, but everyone else's." I smiled back. "Now you know." She hesitated. "Do you think people can really change?" I thought for a moment. "I think pain changes us, but gratitude shapes who we become afterward." She looked confused, so I explained. "When you thank life for the lesson instead of hating it for the loss, that's when real change starts." Her eyes glistened. "You sound like you met a prophet or something." I laughed quietly. Maybe I just finally listened. That evening, when she went to bed, I took out a blank page and wrote again. Gratitude isn't saying, "I'm glad it happened." It's saying, "I'm glad I grew through it." I paused, letting the ink dry under the porch light. Everything Orion said now made sense. He hadn't told me to forget. He'd told me to see how every storm had carried me home, every heartbreak had carved space for more love, every silence had taught me to listen. A few days later, I saw him again, sitting on the pier at sunset, legs dangling above the water like a boy half his age. I approached quietly, and he smiled before I even spoke. "Back again?" I nodded. "You left before I could say thank you." He looked out at the horizon. "That's all right. Gratitude doesn't need an audience." We sat in silence for a while. The sky turned shades of rose and amber, the sea catching every color like it was painting itself new. Finally, I asked, "Do you really believe everything happens for a reason?" He chuckled softly. "No, but I believe everything offers one, if you're patient enough to find it." I thought about that. "So pain has purpose?" "Only if you let it," he said. "Otherwise, it's just noise." I turned toward him. "How do you let it?" He smiled faintly. "By thanking it, not for the hurt, but for what it revealed." I let his words sink in. Thank the pain. It sounded impossible, and yet I'd already been doing it without realizing. I looked at the waves breaking against the pier and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me how strong I wasn't and how strong I became." Orion nodded. "There it is. That's the moment the sea inside you turns calm." I blinked away a tear. "Will it stay calm?" He shook his head. "No ocean ever stays still, but you'll know the rhythm now." That's enough. When I turned to look again, he was already walking away. The sun had nearly disappeared, the last light turning the water gold. Something in me wanted to follow, to keep learning, but another part, the wiser part, knew the lesson was done. I watched him go until the mist swallowed him, then whispered, "Goodbye, Orion." The wind carried my voice out to sea. That night, I wrote my final note in the notebook. Not for him, not for Melissa, for myself. I used to think forgiveness meant erasing the pain. Now I know it means remembering without bleeding. I used to pray for peace. Now I practice gratitude until peace comes on its own. I placed the notebook by the window where the moonlight could read it. Outside, the waves whispered, steady and soft, like applause from the universe itself. I smiled and whispered back, "Thank you for the pruning. I finally see the bloom." The next morning, the world felt lighter. Melissa was making pancakes, humming off-key like she did when she was 10. The air smelled of butter and something new. Not quite joy, but peace, dressed in ordinary clothes. As I sipped my coffee, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. Same lines, same eyes, but something different, a softness I hadn't seen in years. And in that moment, I realized Orion Sage hadn't come to fix me. He came so I'd remember how to see beauty again. In myself, in my daughter, in every scar life left behind. It's strange, the way peace arrives. It doesn't knock. It just walks in one morning, sits down beside you, and you realize it's been waiting for you all along. That's how it felt that day. The air in the house was lighter, as if the walls had exhaled too. Melissa and I were making breakfast. Nothing fancy, just pancakes and coffee. She was humming, off-key and loud, the same tune she used to sing when she was little. For the first time, her laughter didn't hurt. It healed. I thought back to the woman I'd been months ago, holding on to a house, to pride, to pain that had outgrown me, and I wanted to reach back through time, to hold that version of myself and whisper, "You don't have to fight everything. Some things fall apart so you can rest." That afternoon, Melissa came into the living room holding a photo she'd found in an old box. It was of her as a child, missing a tooth, holding a seashell in both hands, grinning like the world belonged to her. "Look," she said, smiling. "This was right after Dad taught me how to dive." I took the photo and felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from remembering how full life used to be. And suddenly, I realized it still was, because love doesn't vanish when life changes shape. It just finds new places to live. Later that day, we drove back to the old beach, the one near the house we lost, not to reclaim anything, but to say goodbye properly this time. The wind was warm, the sea glittered like it had been polished clean by all our mistakes. We stood there for a long time without speaking. Then Melissa said quietly, "I used to think money could fix everything." "And now?" I asked. She sighed. "Now I just want peace." I looked at her, really looked. For the first time in years, I saw not the woman who betrayed me, but the girl who'd been lost trying to find her way back home. I smiled. "Peace doesn't show up at your door. You build it, one grateful thought at a time." She nodded, eyes shining. "You sound like Orion." I laughed softly. Maybe he rubbed off on me. We both laughed then, the kind of laugh that doesn't echo but stays, like light trapped in a shell. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching the sky change colors. The world was quiet again, but it was a good quiet, the kind that holds space for miracles. For a moment, I wondered how many people out there were holding on to their own versions of my story. A daughter who hurt them, a dream that fell apart, a past they couldn't put down. And I wanted to tell them what I had learned, not through wisdom, but through surviving. Don't wait for life to be gentle before you start being grateful. Gratitude is what makes life gentle. Because that was the real miracle, wasn't it? That the same heart that once broke could now hold peace without fear of losing it again. As the stars began to appear, Melissa joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. She handed me one and leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she did when she was small. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Sometimes healing sounds like nothing at all. I looked up at the night sky and thought of Orion, wondering if he was somewhere watching the same stars. "Mom?" Melissa whispered. Do you think people can really start over? Like, completely?" I smiled. "Sweetheart, every sunrise is proof we can." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because something inside me was awake, alive. I got up, opened my notebook, and wrote, "The house was never the home. The home was the heart that kept forgiving. And that heart is still here, still breathing, still learning, still free." When I finished, I didn't cry. I just smiled. The kind of smile that feels like the end of a storm. I finally understood what Orion meant when he said the sea doesn't move on. It returns. I had returned to myself. Somewhere deep down, I knew this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every mother who ever lost something she thought she couldn't live without, and to every daughter who didn't realize love was the only thing she couldn't buy back. Because in the end, we're all just learning the same lesson. How to be grateful before the storm passes. How to find peace before the world gives it to us. The morning after that long night of writing, I woke to sunlight spilling through the curtains. It touched everything. The photos on the wall, the teacup by my bed, even the scar on my hand I used to hide. For the first time, I saw beauty in the ordinary again. Melissa was already gone, off to work at the clinic. She'd left a note on the counter. "You're the strongest woman I know. Thank you for waiting for me to grow up." I held that note for a long time, because somewhere inside it, I heard Orion's voice again. Soft, certain. When the sea takes something, it always brings something back. He was right. The tide had returned. Not the same, but better. That afternoon, I decided to do something small. Something that felt like movement. I went back to the women's shelter in town, the one I used to donate to when times were better. They were short-staffed. I asked if they needed help. They said yes. It wasn't glamorous work. Folding clothes, sorting boxes, washing dishes. But every shirt I folded, every dish I dried, felt like prayer, a thank you whispered through my hands. One of the younger volunteers, a girl no older than Melissa had been when she left home, looked at me and asked, "Why do you still give so much after everything you've been through?" I smiled. "Because giving is how you tell life you're not broken anymore." She nodded slowly, like she was memorizing the words, and in her eyes, I saw the same light that Orion had seen in mine, the kind that says, maybe we can all start over, one act of kindness at a time. That night when I came home, I sat on the porch again. Same chair, same sound of the sea. But everything was different, because this time I wasn't waiting for anything to come back. I was simply grateful it ever came at all. The stars were bright, the air soft with salt and night, and I thought about every woman out there watching the waves of her own life, the ones who lost homes, or love, or themselves for a while. If you're one of them, I want to tell you this. Your story isn't over just because something ended. Sometimes the end is just life rearranging itself to fit the truth you're ready to live. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the wind, "Thank you, life, for taking me the long way home." For the first time, I wasn't talking to anyone, and yet I knew someone, somewhere, was listening. You know, I used to think peace meant silence, but peace is when your heart stops shouting at life and starts whispering back, "Thank you." So maybe that's where I'll end my story, right here, in the quiet, with the sound of waves keeping time with my breath. But before you go, I'll tell you this. If you've ever had your heart broken and somehow found beauty growing in the cracks, you already know what healing feels like. If you're still in the middle of your storm, that's okay too. The tide hasn't forgotten you. It's just learning your rhythm. And hey, if you felt something while listening to this story, even just a tiny shift inside you, do this for me. If you're still learning to forgive, press like. If you found your own version of peace, type 1 in the comments so others know they're not alone. And if you want to walk this path of healing and gratitude with me again, hit subscribe, because maybe the next story will sound a little like yours. I looked out at the ocean one last time before going in. The water shimmered gold, the same color as the promise Orion left behind. Somewhere out there, the tide was still turning, and so was I. And that, I realized, was enough.